just came on a minute early for people to find their way on. So we'll just give you a chance, say hello, let us know where you're from. And I know it takes folks a moment to come on. All right, so say hello when you join us. Welcome, welcome everyone. All right, Terry, good evening. Hey, Colleen, Robin, welcome. Ketty, hi, Diane. Hey, Sharon. Welcome, everyone. All right, good to see everyone. We're going to be talking tonight. I'm glad you're all checking in. Let's see, I was going to try to get Paulette. Let's see if we can get Paulette. And no, unfortunately, let's see. There you are.
Hey.
Hey, Paulette.
Hey.
Hi there, welcome. All right. Well, we're all here. We're just giving people a chance to say hello. Okay. Let's see who's on so far. Pat's here. Hey, Candace. For those of you who haven't been with us, it's almost like our romper room moment where we say hello to folks. Hey, Naomi from the Bay Area. Jennifer from South Carolina. I'm so impressed with the East Coast folks that they are here and awake, and that's wonderful. So thank you. Teresa from Upper Michigan. Daniel from Wheeling, Illinois. Hey, Nicole. Welcome, welcome, everyone. It's so good to see all of you. So tonight we have one of our topics. I'll introduce everyone in just a moment, but I'll give folks a chance to come on and say hello. Oh, good. We got some folks from New Zealand. Wonderful. Hey, Tina from New York. Lindsay from New Zealand. Gina's like, you did it, Paulette. Sherry's from New Hampshire. Deborah, Arkansas. Wonderful, wonderful, everyone. So one of the traditions we have here, or that I have here, is that so many of us have, well, all of us have had a loss. And I think it's so important that we take a moment to just honor those who have died, and just to give it a moment to remember them, send them love, bring them into the present tense. So if everyone would join me to just take a moment and send those who have died our love. Thank you. So I thought, given that we've been in the midst of Passover and Easter, I wanted to invite some folks on just to talk about the idea of a loss of faith. You know, grief is a time when many people get angry at God, lose faith. Do we find faith again? Lots of different questions. So everyone that's here has in some way or another ministered to people, been a chaplain, supported people at the end of life in grief, and they've all had a death themselves. So how about we just go around and maybe just tell us a line or two of what you do and share about the loss that brought you into the grief world here. I'm sure many of us have had lots of them. So Bradley, I'll start with you.
Yes, I'm Bradley Vinson. I consider myself a chaplain. Well, I am a chaplain and a minister, and I consider myself an advocate for the grieving community. My loss was my 4-year-old granddaughter back in May 11, 2016. And a few months after that, I started serving the grieving community, and I've been doing it ever since. And that's my story in a nutshell, short version.
Thank you for being here, Garrick.
My name is Garrick Colwell, and I'm here because my wife died about a little over a year ago, and it's propelled me into a deeper understanding and search for how to support other people who are grieving.
Thank you, Paulette.
I lost my son by suicide 4 years ago, my adult son. And I am here as a hospice chaplain and an ordained interfaith minister and a medium. And
Thank you.
life coach. All those.
Thank you. So, and for those of you who may not know me, I started this channel that we're on, this group, because so many people in the pandemic had lost, on top of their own deaths, they had lost their grief group, their grief support, and now people who are dying and not being able to see those they love at the end of life. They are then dealing with being isolated in grief. And during this pandemic, I wanted people to come together and at least virtually hold each other's hands. So I'm just curious for the group, and we can sort of do this one by one. I'll just maybe ask the question so you have a chance to answer it. I want to keep the topic sort of on from the religious, spiritual perspective, since that's what we're talking about tonight. Garrick, do you see people who have lost faith? Is that normal? What do you do when they've lost faith? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think it's part and parcel of coming to terms with acknowledging and accepting, in the process of accepting someone who's close to you who's died. And so there's obviously your mind wants to jump in and try and find the why immediately. And somehow, as we've talked about before, there isn't necessarily a good why, but your mind drives you to a point where it oftentimes overshadows everything else you're thinking about and trying to drive a why. And if you have strong faith up to the end, or around that time, all of a sudden you don't feel that somehow that faith no longer supports you or is helped you along in your grief. And so there is. I mean, I had a family in one situation that had miscarried, and this is their fifth child that they were mourning, and they couldn't quite understand. They had been very faithful to all the teachings that they had subscribed to their entire life. I mean, as a matter of fact, for many generations. And they couldn't necessarily reconcile why God would do this to them as a result of all the things they had done right. And so in their case, it was just a matter of listening to them and allowing them to share their pain, obviously, and share their concern, because it's almost like they had two losses. They not only lost a child, but they also lost their faith. And losing faith in this situation wasn't just losing faith once, but it was losing faith for a lifetime of belief. And so it's a big, big deal in their case, for sure. And so basically, what did I say to them? I listened and allowed them to sort through how it is they were going to come to terms with, and not in that conversation. I know full well that it wasn't a conversation that was going to continue. It was going to continue. It wasn't going to be a conversation that was going to get it resolved. There's nothing I could have said other than just giving them a place in which they could, a vessel where they could put that concern in. And then at some point in time, perhaps they would reestablish that faith, because there would be a new day for them. They would be able then to look at it from a different point of view, but the time had to pass. And it wasn't something I could have said in the moment that would have relieved them, other than to let them speak and let them speak their heart.
And Paulette, when you're working with someone in hospice who's dying, and folks are angry with God or feel deserted by God, how have you supported them?
Well, first of all, I don't go in with my own agenda. I'm really there to meet them wherever they're at, and I am there to listen, bringing a supportive presence, and they need to express it, and they need to know that I am not going to judge them for it. but I need to, provide a safe container for them to share that anger. And oftentimes in the sharing of the anger, they get in touch then with the pain underneath the anger. And it's kind of would go layer by layer. And then underneath that, they begin to sometimes, not always, but sometimes find their own new reality in terms of their spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs. It's like a new part of themselves opens up and they have new beliefs. Not only are we new people or different than before our loved one died, someone who's dying goes through a similar experience. And so then they can start to reclaim that. And so then I help them find the sacred. To me, that's what gives life meaning, is looking for the sacred. And it can be as simple as a child laughing, or a tree that we look out the window and see. So it's kind of like taking baby steps until there's some meaning and some sacredness reclaimed.
Right. And Bradley, how do you support people in grief who are feeling abandoned by their religion, their God, maybe even by their church? Many times people will feel like their church in different ways wasn't there for them. How do you deal with all those feelings people deal with?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a multi-tiered process. I mean, first you listen and support, and as the Bible tells us, we mourn with those who mourn. So a lot of time they just want their grief to be witnessed. So just sitting in the midst of their grief is helpful to let them know that you're there to walk with them. But I mean, quite honestly, churches do a great job up until the funeral, right? Everybody calls you, they help you prepare, they help you buy the flowers, they help you set up the church, they figure out who's going to sing and all this kind of stuff. And then right after the funeral, that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that following week, the church is moving on. They have Bible study, they have church the next Sunday, right? And the church as a body moves on. And where are you? You go back to church, and some people that never talk to you are talking to you all the time now. Some people that always talk to you don't talk to you now because they don't know what to say. And people feel lost in their own grief. And that's when wounds start to happen. That's when I think faith strain starts to happen. Sometimes there is faith loss, but I believe there's also a faith strain when we're like, I'm a great Christian. I pray for other people when they get sick. But when my mom got sick, God didn't save her. Right. And so there's a faith strain, as in, what do I really believe, and what theology am I really following? And so it's a process of kind of walking them through that too. But in the bigger scope of it, trying to help them realize that grief is a show of faith. You're not faithless because you're grieving. Grieving is part of the faith process also. And how do you do that well? And so kind of just walking with them and comforting them through that process and letting them know that God is patient. God is always there, but it's the cloud of grief that makes him hard to see, right? But he's there. He's patient. Whenever you're ready to come back, God is ready. And so I just kind of walk them through that process, and there's no time limits and things like that, but comforting them through the process of the pain that they're now carrying with their faith.
I think it's a challenge to navigate different religions. I've always had to meet people where they are. I think it's really important we respect people where they are, and when they have beliefs different than us.
Right.
I can remember, as I mentioned this today, half my family is Jewish, the other half is evangelical Christian. And we had a 43-year-old family member who was dying from cancer on the evangelical Christian side. And we were all at the ICU as she was approaching death and in the waiting room. And the nurses from the oncology office came to say their goodbyes, and they started talking to all of us and introducing themselves. And I said, "Hi, I'm David Kessler." And they said, uh, there's a David Kessler that writes books on hospice and palliative care and grief. And I went, "Yeah, that's me." And they went, "That's you? Wait a minute. She should have been in hospice. Like, how can this be you? Why aren't you doing something about this?" And I said, I have to respect they're expecting a miracle from Jesus. Is their belief. I have to respect that. And I think the hard thing for me to watch is after she died, and I've seen this before, there is a sense that maybe we just didn't have enough faith. Maybe our prayers just weren't as deep as they could be. So, how do you folks deal with that when you come across that sense?
Mhm.
I speak about it in one of my talks when, because my wife and I minister to couples and people call us when somebody's sick and things like that. And the week after my granddaughter's funeral, a friend called me about his wife being ill and wanted us to pray for her. And the first thought that came to my mind was our drive to go see about my daughter and my granddaughter that passed away. And my wife looks at me in the car and said, "Why didn't God give us a chance to pray for her to be healed?" And so here I am 2 weeks later, somebody's asking me to pray for his family, right? And in the midst of that, I think our faith can hold us even when things don't go our way. And it's kind of hard to speak on that in generic terms because it works different for everybody. Because I had strain. I was like, all I have is grief talk for God. He didn't want to hear that. But that's what he wants to hear, right? But the flesh part of me was saying, no, you're supposed to praise God and give him all this good lovey-dovey talk. He doesn't want to hear you weeping all the time, right? But that's exactly what he wants to hear. And I think in our process, when I tell people the things that you worry about, that's your prayer list, right? There's a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations, when somebody's essentially whining and complaining to God, right? So that's part of the process, and everything doesn't go our way. Honestly, ultimately, we all will transition. We don't know when. It was just in the process of our journey, people are leaving before us and people will leave after us. And we have to do what we can now to live out our faith as best we can through whatever it is. And sometimes that's a hard discussion to have in the midst of grief, but that doesn't make it untrue, right? And so that's part of the thing where I'm a great Christian, nothing bad would ever happen to me. That's just bad theology. But when bad does happen, what does that do to you and through you? Right.
Right.
And so I think at some point once we get there in our grief journey, things start to break loose for us and we can kind of travel better because the journey doesn't end. We just figure out a way to carry what we have in a better way.
Thank you. Paulette, do you want to add anything to that?
I do. I think the different places I've gone on my own spiritual journey and my own experience with grief, having lost my parents and my son around the same time, um, I definitely could feel a lot of the things that I have worked with family members on when they're grieving the loss of a loved one. And I think there is something very important about getting lost. There's been books, so many books written about the importance of being lost and just emptying the self, which grief does quite naturally. And so I do, I really, try to give a level of understanding in terms of how normal it is that they're feeling what they're feeling and meeting them where they're at, and praying together for understanding. And that's sometimes all we can do. And I rely on my intuition in the moment because everyone is different and there's not a pat answer that I can give you right now. But I might do different things at different times. But again, honoring where they're at is so crucial.
Well, and the time element is so true because even with my own family, early on, I wanted to dive in, but I
Mhm.
needed to wait till they were ready.
Yep.
And it was really a couple of years later that one of them said, if we had just had more faith, she wouldn't have died.
Mm.
And I remember saying, let me ask you this. Isn't it true that Jesus died? I mean, even Jesus died. And I said, would you agree that there have been Christians who have had enormous faith? And she said, yes. And I said, so every Christian eventually has died at some point at the end of their life. So I don't believe that no one had enough faith. What if death is just part of this journey and it doesn't occur because of a lack of faith? It's just part of this experience. Same way birth is. Garrick, your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I think that when you're talking about the idea that that faith somehow is going to give you an option as to whether you die or not is a misconception. And obviously, that's part of, I think, what I heard in your conversation. And that the idea is that faith is a bridge to get you to perhaps a deeper understanding of who you are and how you relate and how you exist and where the love comes from and how you're supported along the way. What brings us together in grief is the love. I mean, you've said this many times before, is at some point at some point in the future, you get to remember them with more love than pain. So
Right.
Paulette was talking about Paulette was talking about layers. And it's like, well, underneath that anger, and then what's underneath that is the pain, and underneath that is the love, because you wouldn't be in pain unless you loved. And so God loves us as we are, just as we are. Our defilement's greater than we know. And so you don't ever lose your faith. You just may think in your mind that you've lost faith, but you've never lost the connection. Those are all mental constructs we put in place to help identify ourselves as being this way or that way. And when they're challenged by a death, when something is so universally devastating, overwhelming, and suffocating at times, then you can't really see those pieces. And when you start to pray harder, well, in fact, if you're praying for an outcome, maybe that's the point of saying, well, maybe if I listen, I ask for guidance, I pray for guidance, I pray, like Paulette was saying, I pray for understanding and pray for guidance, and then just sit back and listen and allow that to sink in instead of trying to push for an outcome, because prayers are answered. They're just answered not necessarily the way you think they should be, but they're answered. And they come in the most odd and unusual ways. They may come through a waking dream. They may come through a lyric in a song that you heard, or they may come through picking up a book that somehow you just happened to walk by that day and picked up and said, oh, there's the answer to my prayer. So praying, but listening, not necessarily trying to direct, because I think God's got this handled. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So then listen. At the same time as you listen, allow it to come to you in a way that you may not expect, because oftentimes that's the way it doesn't ever come back to. In my prayers or my contemplations, and I'm looking for guidance, it never shows up the way I think it should, because that's with my mind. That's not with me as soul.
Right.
I was privileged when I worked in a 3-hospital system to work with all the chaplains there.
Mhm.
And to be many times when, whether it's a rabbi or a priest or a minister came in. And I always knew we were in good hands when the prayer was, let's pray for a healing, which may or may not be of the body.
Yeah, good point.
Sometimes healing isn't of the body. There is a time when the body naturally winds down this lifetime. So let's go to some challenging areas. How do you deal with the folks that you encounter that say, my loved one has been exiled from heaven. My loved one can't get into heaven. They died by an overdose. They died by suicide. And you're dealing with those beliefs, those old religious beliefs that haven't caught up to modern medicine.
Oh, can I answer that
Sure,
one first?
go right ahead.
I cannot see pictures of any of you, by the way. So I want to just give an example of something that I walked into, and as a chaplain, and I walked into a home with a gay couple. The patient was the other half of that couple, was in the active dying stage. And I literally saw different members of their family, of their families, in different corners of each of the same room. There was the Christian, there was the Jewish, they all had different belief systems, and they all believed that something different should have been happening in that moment. And that they were all, the family members that were in the corners all believed that he was having a difficult death because he was gay. So I knew I had very limited time. So what I did do is I invited them all to come to the bedside and put their hands on him and send him love. And so that's what we did. Oops, I'm hearing something cracking. Sent love. Sent love to every single part of him. And it really brought everybody together, and they were able to do that. It took a little bit of time and a little bit of coaxing from me, but they all got in touch. I kind of took them back to when he was a baby, and then, and just the love that they had for him shone through eventually. And in my own experience, I did have people in that they thought they were somehow comforting me, say that my son now, they would pray that he would not stay in hell, that kind of thing. And, I would just always say, I believe God is a loving God, and let it go at that. But those are very painful experiences to both witness or experience personally. And I just think, again, going back to the love, those layers that I was talking about, going back through the layers and until you get to the love. Thank you. That's all.
I love that when chaplains, priests, rabbis, ministers, they come to the lectures that I do, and they'll say, no one has taught us that medicine is now considering death by suicide or death by overdose an illness of the mind and not a sin anymore. And I think that's a lack of education that we have to sort of do better for them to help them know that.
Yeah, I think that character, right? Man cannot judge spirit or heart. We have no idea what that person has done to accept Christ or what relationship they have with Christ. No, I can judge character by how somebody treats me,
Right.
but that's not judging their spiritual awareness and their relationship with Christ. I mean, I guess we're speaking kind of in the religions that we believe. So, and quite bluntly, I tell people I don't have a heaven or hell to put anybody in. That is not within my power.
Right.
What I can do is give the family comfort in where they are, that our God is a loving God, and those decisions are made by him. Because some people feel that until you are of the age where you can understand scripture and truly accept Christ through the Romans road or what other people may call it, that you can't be saved. So what does that say for babies and kids? What does that say for special needs people that may not be able to understand, right? And I worship a loving God that makes decisions beyond my realm of comprehension. And I tell people all the time, if you make it to heaven, you might be surprised who you see there and who you don't see there. And so the things that we rack our minds with that we cannot control, we couldn't control them staying alive or dying. So why would we rack our minds with, now there is worry because I love my family and I want all of them to spend eternity with me, with God, but that's a personal decision for them. I just have to believe in my heart that they have. And if I ever have the opportunity to evangelize to a family member, I don't miss that opportunity. But it's still their obligation to accept it. And if they don't accept it from me, that's fine. They may accept it later. If they never had an opportunity to accept it, that's still something I can't control. Because, I mean, we know the Bible story of David when he did what he did with Bathsheba and the child died when David was just racking his mind and, not eating and stuff like that. And when the child died, he had peace. He said, well, now I will be with my son. So now I can go eat. Now, we don't know if that baby ever accepted Christ, but David knew where he was going. And when he said he was going to be with his child, he believed that God was going to have his child in heaven, right? So there's things that we can control, things that we can have angst over and things like that in our grief. And I think they hinder the healing process when we try to take on things that we just can't control.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I just kind of sit with the family in that to give them peace. And, I can't pray anybody into heaven after they're dead. I don't believe in that. But I just try to give the family peace and walk with them through that process that we don't control that. That was for them to control. But you can't put what you think is a bad thing on them to keep them out of heaven. You don't have a heaven or hell to put anybody in. That's not within your power. So.
And I also think, so many people have different religions and different beliefs. It becomes challenging if you are trying to overlay a belief system on someone else's. And we really have to honor and meet people for who they are and where they are. Like I said earlier today on the earlier session, one of my best friends is an atheist, and she is so loving, and she works hard to do the right, loving, kind thing in life. And she doesn't do it to get into heaven. She just does it because kindness counts and love matters. And it impresses me so much. And, how things are going to work with who believes what, I leave all that up to God. Let's go over some of the questions that people or comments people made early. I'll read them to you. And if any of you have any comments that you would like to, or questions you want to ask us, please feel free to type them in now. But let me just go to some of these questions that were asked ahead of time. All right, let's see. All right, few comments here. They are. All right, Jennifer said, I have multiple losses of people very close to me in a short span of time. I've come to realize that I can't get answers to questions that might bring me some closure. I'm learning how to release these to God. My grief is too big for me to handle. My faith is slowly getting stronger. Lovely. It's a lovely comment. Donna says, my 39-year-old daughter passed away 6 months ago. She died by suicide. She just wanted to feel normal. I prayed and prayed and prayed for God to heal her, but he did not, at least not on earth. When I pray, in the back of my mind, I think, why pray? God doesn't hear my prayers. Anyone want to take that?
I will.
Okay.
I think I said something similar after my son died. Like, why even give me the gift of being able to be a medium? Why give me any gifts if you're just my son's going to be taken away? I think that it, again, is a period of time, a stage in the grief that is important to be witnessed. It's important to express it. It's a it's normal to feel that way after losing a child by suicide, especially. Um, and I just think, you know, there is another side to it that can come in time. And before we go tonight, I was hoping to share a very brief poem that speaks to it. So I hope you'll listen when I read it. Hopefully,
Is it possible for you to post that later?
yeah, I can either post it. Yeah, I can
I
post
think
it.
it'd be great if you just wrote it out and posted it, just so we can get to
Okay.
some of the questions. All right, let's see here.
Can I speak to something about the prayer real quick also?
Sure.
Um, I had a very dear aunt that had a stroke, and she was nonverbal for over a year between her stroke and her death. And I constantly prayed for my aunt to be healed. And ultimately, she passed away. And I remember at her funeral, I had already grieved her through her stroke because she was no longer the aunt that I knew, right?
Right.
And there was a relief or an awakening or freedom or deliverance for me at her funeral that now she's whole. What I had prayed for all that time for her healing, God had fulfilled it to me in that moment because she's with him, she's whole. And as you were saying earlier, the prayers that we ask for, they're always answered.
Right.
They're not answered sometimes the way we think they are, but sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is wait. Sometimes the answer is yes or whatever else. And it comes in all these different ways. And it was just something that came over me at her funeral when I was speaking that she's whole.
Right.
Thank you, God. You know, and so it comes in different ways. And when you're expecting a certain type of answer for your prayer, sometimes your prayers don't seem like they're getting through.
Right.
But as you said before, pray and listen. Prayers are conversations.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street. Give
It's
some, listen, take some.
also
Garrick,
important to understand that when you pray is to let go. Surrender, actually, that don't keep on taking it back. Don't keep on trying to figure it out yourself, but actually pray, surrender that request and that request for insight, the request for deeper understanding, and then let it go. Be present with the fact that now you can, if you let it go, you can listen. But if you keep on taking it back, you're not listening. You're holding on because you think you have a better solution. Well, in fact, the whole point why I'm praying is to surrender it, let it go, and then be in a place where you can listen.
or I think we've all done that. Right? Wait, God, no, you're getting it wrong. But maybe you didn't understand the prayer. Let me clear that up. Garrick, would you also take this one? How do you support a spouse in their loss of faith through grief? My husband's dad died 12 years ago. Since then, my husband has been silent with God. In a usual way, I have grieved my husband's loss of faith too. So how do you deal with sort of in that relationship that one's grieving the spouse's loss of faith?
Yeah, it's a good question. I read that comment earlier and thought, wow, you basically you're grieving their faith, but you're also grieving the difference in the relationship you have between one another. Because at one point in time, that relationship was based upon a mutual understanding as to how faith worked in your life and therefore in your marriage. And now you have someone who is not responsive according to your beliefs as the way they should be, because you guys had an agreement earlier that's now not being met because they're grieving in a different way. So part of it is maybe stepping back and saying, allowing them to be where they need to be, because it doesn't mean that the love between you changed. It just means that their manifestation of it isn't coming about in the same way as you thought you guys had agreed to before, and that they need to express that in a different way. And if they're quiet with God, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not connected, because none of us are not connected. We're all connected. And certainly we can see that happening around the planet today, going through the challenging times we're going through, both one-on-one, as well as we can see more clearly that there's a lot of serendipity that takes place. So when it comes to faith, she may just be in a place where allowing him to be where he needs to be and realizing that the reason they're together is because they love each other. more than anything else, that love is there. And the faith is expressed differently between them, but the love still, the love never dies.
This is Robin's question here. Robin says, some is confusing. Maybe it isn't a question, I haven't read it yet. Robin says, sometimes faith is confusing. I struggle with faith all the time. Husband is Catholic, and I'm Jewish. She is very spiritual. We buried Danielle in a Catholic cemetery. I sometimes think I did the wrong thing, but Danielle always said, no, Mom, I'm Jewish. So I went against my religion, and she is now in a Catholic cemetery. I honored her with her spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that case, for me, I think, my goodness, the greatest gift you can give someone is trying to honor them in death. So I don't know that in Danielle's world, which part of the earth she's buried in matters as much. So that's just my own thought. Let's see. Jennifer says, I struggle after the loss of my husband and feel that he died because I didn't have enough faith and didn't pray hard enough. I appreciate hearing this evening that it wasn't in my control. Very good. Thank you. Misty says, my dad has terminal cancer and I'm shutting down. This is on the heels of my son having his leg amputated when being hit by a drunk driver, and it seems my mind can't handle the pain. I need to be more there for my dad. What can I do to open my heart to his needs? He's been an amazing father. Bradley?
I would ask my father in her position. I would ask my father, what does he need from me? How can I give him comfort? How can I spend time with him? What can I do to help him have peace? Because I know what I don't know, but in a situation where there's a parent that's at the end of life, or they're going through an illness, even through cancer or something, and they have children, they are still worrying about their children. And I've seen it time and time again when parents are at the end of life, they're worrying about, how are my children going to fare when I'm gone? The matriarch or patriarch is about to leave.
Right.
Are my adult kids going to be okay? And I think her giving her dad some comfort, as in, I'm going to do the things I need to do to heal dad and to do the right things and to give comfort to the rest of the family. What can I do to honor you in our time we have together, whatever that time is? I think that's the best way to serve someone is ask them how they want to be served. I think a lot of times the hardest conversations we just don't have, and we need to just have the conversations. What do you need from me to help you have peace and to help you feel better?
And have faith that those conversations are going to be, you're going to say the right thing at the right time, and there's no right thing or right time. It just is your loving presence being there and having faith that those words will come. Whenever those words are, will be just right.
Right. I've seen a lot of families where the elder statesman is in their last moments, and when the child comes in and says, I'm going to be okay,
Yeah.
They release and they transition. And a lot of times that's the piece they need. Are you going to be okay? What are you doing even now to be better in the midst of my illness? And I think that's a great gift we can give to those we love.
I also think with that question that, I always say, if you're not sure what to do, there's two things you can always do: love the person and make them right. They're doing the best they can. Love them and make them right. Daniel asked,
David,
yes.
do you mind if I say something about that? Sometimes the person cannot speak or articulate what they're wanting. If we were to ask them, what do you need from me? So in my own experience with my father, it was a very difficult relationship he and I had before he got Alzheimer's. And then we got very close when he was having full-blown dementia. He was a sweetheart. And I really needed, my intuition told me that he really needed to hear that he was forgiven and that I would take care of Mom, his wife. So I did. I said those things, and he did. He just looked at me, and then he breathed his last breath. So sometimes it is a matter of just listening to your heart. You know, there's a part of you that knows what to say.
Right.
So just wanted to speak to that.
Okay.
Thanks.
And trust.
All right. So we got a lot of questions here. Let me try to get through some of them. Is anger towards God the result of trying to do some bargaining with God? And Bradley, you're shaking your head yes.
It reminds me of a chaplain call that I went on. It was a grieving husband. His wife passed away. And one of the first things he told me was, I asked her to wait for me. I wanted us to die together. And I asked her to wait for me, and God took her. And it was a sense of anger that came over him because he felt that he asked his wife to stay for a little bit longer, and God said no. So there was some anger in that. And I was trying to help him find peace in that moment. And he believed that his wife was a believer and that he would be with her again someday. And but I told him this too. I said, have you ever been angry at your daughter or your wife or your other kids or your friends? Well, yeah. I said, anger doesn't break the relationship. The relationship still stands even through anger. God understands your anger.
Right.
I said, and it's okay. I said, yes, your wife has transitioned, and she was unable to wait. It was her time.
Right.
And so we just kind of talked through that piece, but we also let him know that anger is okay. You get angry with people you love. God is no different. It doesn't break the relationship to be angry, but it does come with some of that bargaining. I've had a brother-in-law, when my mother-in-law passed away, he said, I prayed that God would take years off my life and give them to her so she could be here longer. And God didn't do that. Right. And so I had to help him have peace through that, where, sometimes we don't own enough chips to bargain with God.
Right.
It is what it is. And that's part of our life's journey. None of us get out of here alive.
Well,
It's just that we have angst over the time when it happens.
the anger is an expression of the pain.
Right.
We acknowledge what anger is, and anger isn't good or bad. It just simply is another emotion being expressed. And so you're hurt. So you lash out and you are angry, and it doesn't, necessarily justify certain types of anger, but fundamentally it comes from a place of where you're open up beyond your comprehension or your ability or your willingness to be vulnerable. So
Right.
pain.
And panelists, if you would let me get through the question, just like maybe one of you answer the question, then we'll go to another one, just so we get through more of these questions. Nazarene says, my husband passed away 1 year ago. I've been praying for God's comfort and not getting any. I can't accept why me. I have 2 young kids. Other old people are still alive. Paulette, what would you say to her?
I would say pay attention to the stories you're hearing from other people that have felt similarly and who were able to get to the other side of that. And just hold on to that hope, even if you don't see it, even if you don't feel it. As other panelists have said, God, whatever you want to use in terms of your belief system, we are loved, we are cared for, we are supported, and it may not look the way you want it to look right now, and it may feel very far away, but it's there, and it will reveal itself to you. It will.
And I would also say to her and Tina, who has a question about why, a couple of days ago, we did a session on why did this happen to me. So I would say, go back and look for, it's titled Why. Karen says, my last prayer for my son in church for Christmas was to please help him overcome his depression. He completed suicide. I have been struggling with my faith. I would say, of course you have. And it just happened. And, I think faith needs some time there sometimes. We want things to be instant, and grief takes time. Grief takes time. Gina says, my 10-year-old son loved God. We were decorating our church for Thanksgiving. As he hauled the pumpkins in, he says, Mom, I love being in God's house. You know, he is in my heart. What do you think heaven is like? Our pastor answered all his questions. He was so blessed. 2 days later, Thanksgiving Day, he died in a quad accident. I truly believe God blessed us with that day. I know for sure he is in heaven, and I miss him so much. Ketty says anger with God is an act of faith. That's interesting. Kimberly says, you are all so right. I'm with hospice, and that's all I care about is leaving my children. I'm estranged from my oldest son and my son for 2 years, and I have a grandson I've never met. It's crushing my soul and struggling with faith. The estrangement thing is a really, really hard thing. Anyone have questions on that? Because that certainly dampens our faith. Well, I'll just chip in there. I would say this, whenever I've been estranged from someone, I notice I want to look at, first of all, I pay attention to my story. When there's estrangement, I want to tell you what I've done. I want to gather evidence against them. I want to come from very much a place of right. Now, by the way, the person who asked that question, nothing I say is about you. I know nothing about your life. I'm just telling you from my perspective. I always want to look at what they're doing wrong and how I've tried to do it all right and somehow it's been missed the mark. And I have to really be willing, and this is a tough thing for me, I think, is the communications they've had to really look at them and go, what if they're right? What if I am too controlling? What if I am too pushy? To really sort of give credence to whatever their issues have been. Because so many times when we're estranged, we want to go, yeah, but what about you? And I only find I can look at my side of the road. And once I've looked at my side of the road, everything that they say or before the estrangement they said was an issue or upset them, can I work on myself? And after I've had a chance, then I will communicate somehow, whether it's an email or something saying, I miss you, I love you, and I'm sorry for my part. That's sort of the best advice I can give you with estrangement, but it's complex, it's tough.
David, I've 2 questions in a situation like that I ask myself, what do I have to give? What do I have to learn? And those
Right.
2 questions kind of bring me right to the center of what you're talking about as a way of dealing with estrangement. It's like, well, what do I have to learn from this for myself? And then what do I have to give to it?
It's about
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead,
forgiveness.
Paulette.
Well, forgiveness really, I've not met anyone that I've worked with anyway that's dying that hasn't had some level of forgiveness that's needed. Usually it comes back to self-forgiveness, but also it sometimes is about asking for forgiveness from others. And to just, in a case like this, I would have somebody write a letter to their loved ones just saying, I'm so sorry. I forgive you for everything. I love you. I ask for your forgiveness. Whatever, without knowing the story. Just so that in your heart and soul that you just cleaned the plate before you depart. That's what I would do.
Right. And I think so many times we really have to ask ourselves, do we want to be right or happy? Because I know I can be guilty of wanting to be right. And I have to ask myself, number one, is there really a right? Or really was it my way? And could there be 2 rights in this situation? Can I see it their way? Well, we are already out of time. So for those of you who are just joining us, maybe it's your first time, I would love you to come back. I'd love you to share. What we do is 1 p.m. Pacific time every day. I come on give you a different topic. We talk about it. You can ask questions. So that's 1 p.m. Pacific, and that's 4 p.m. Eastern. You can use the timezoneconverter.com to take a look and make sure you know when it is in your area. And then in the evening, just like tonight, we have different guests on. So we have a lot of interesting people for next week. Let me tell you who's going to be here. Monday night, Paul is going to be doing grief yoga, chair grief yoga. You don't have to know anything about yoga. You're going to find it's an amazing release of anger, of why, of what if, and regrets. He's doing that at 5 p.m. So you can watch. You don't have to participate. It's really interesting to tune in and check that out. He talks about our issues are in our tissues, and this isn't about physical flexibility.
That's a good one.
Tuesday, we're going to have at 6 p.m. Milo Garcia. She started the organization after her infant daughter Chloe died. And we don't talk about infant deaths or miscarriages as much as we should. So she'll be here then. Then on Wednesday night, Kim Goldman's going to be here, and that's going to be at 5 p.m. Kim, many of you know, has had to deal with grief in the public eye. Her brother, Ron Coldman, was killed, and she is part of the podcast Confronting O.J. Simpson. And then Thursday night will be Jason Green. Jason wrote an incredible book called Once More We Saw Stars after the death of his daughter. And then Friday, we're going to have Cheryl, I believe it's Duyere, on, and she's going to talk about overdoses and the opioid epidemic. And then Saturday is going to be Diane Gray, who's a bereaved mom, and she's a hospice and palliative care specialist and leader, as well as spokesperson for the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. So a lot of amazing people coming on. We don't want anyone to have to grieve alone during this pandemic. Please make sure you let other people know about this so they can feel less alone. Even though we can't physically connect, we can virtually hold each other's hands. So Bradley, Garrick, Paulette, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving your time to this. Everyone who's on is volunteers, and they're here to just be of service and give during this challenging time we're all in. So thanks, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you.